A young woman hitchhikes on the side of a California highway. A car pulls up beside her, a large man at the wheel, smiling politely. She hesitates but then climbs inside. He seems friendly, normal. But within hours, she'll be nothing more than another missing person report, her body discarded like trash. This is the story of Edmund Kemper, the giant who stalked young women, the man who mutilated corpses, and the killer who sat across from the police drinking with them while they hunted him. You think you know this story? Trust me, you don't. Monsters aren't born, they're made. And Edmund Emil Kemper III's transformation into a cold-blooded killer started long before his first murder. Born on December 18, 1948, in Burbank, California, Kemper entered a world where he was never truly wanted. His father, Edmund Kemper II, was a World War II veteran who struggled to connect with his son. His mother, Clarnell, was a different story, vicious, controlling, and emotionally abusive. She hated men, but she especially hated her own son. She belittled him daily, calling him stupid, worthless, and destined to be a failure. She locked him in a cold basement at night, claiming he was too dangerous to sleep near his two sisters, but in doing so, she only fed the darkness growing inside him. His mother was cruel, domineering, and obsessed with breaking her son's spirit. Young Edmund spent hours alone in that basement, his mind warping. He developed a fascination with death. It started with small things, dismembering dolls, tearing the heads off his sister's toys. But soon he graduated to something more sinister. He began dissecting live animals, studying their insides, fascinated by the lifeless eyes staring back at him. At 10 years old, he killed his first cat. He buried it alive, then dug it up later to see what had happened to its body. At 13, he slaughtered another, this time keeping the decapitated head as a trophy. And yet, no one stopped him. No one saw the warning signs. Or maybe they did, but they ignored them. Because in his mind, he already knew his first true target, his mother. By 15, Edmund was growing too large and too defiant for his mother to control. She shipped him off to live with his grandparents in the middle of nowhere. It was supposed to be a fresh start, but for Edmund it was just the beginning of his killing career. His grandmother, Maud Kemper, was just as controlling as his mother. She criticized him constantly, picked apart everything he did. Then on August 27, 1964, Edmund finally saw red and all hell broke loose. While she sat at the kitchen table, Edmund picked up his grandfather's rifle, raised it to the back of her head. With no hesitation, he pulled the trigger. The bullet tore through her skull, spraying the wall with brain matter. But it wasn't enough. He shot her twice more, ensuring she was dead. Then, as if testing himself, he took a kitchen knife and stabbed her lifeless body repeatedly. Minutes later, his grandfather returned home. Edmund met him at the driveway and, without hesitation, raised the rifle again. But here's where it gets chilling. Instead of running, Edmund calmly picked up the phone and called his mother. He told her exactly what he had done, his voice devoid of any emotion. And when police arrived, he simply said, "I just wanted to see what it felt like." At the age of 15, Edmund Kemper was committed to a Atascadero State Hospital, a maximum security psychiatric facility for the criminally insane. This wasn't just a juvenile detention center. It was a place where some of the most dangerous and disturbed individuals were kept, ranging from violent criminals to those with severe psychological disorders. But unlike many of the inmates, Kemper wasn't just there for punishment. He had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, and the goal was to rehabilitate him. Upon arrival, Kemper underwent extensive psychological evaluations. Doctors noted his high intelligence. His IQ was measured at 145, far above average. This alone set him apart from most of the other young offenders. Despite his intelligence, his mental state was concerning. He was cold, detached, and displayed an eerie lack of remorse for the brutal double murder of his grandparents. He admitted to killing his grandmother to see what it felt like, and his grandfather to avoid punishment. Key psychological findings were high IQ, 145, but emotionally stunted, paranoid schizophrenia diagnosis, lack of emotional connection to his crimes, deep-seated anger toward his mother, a growing obsession with violence and control. Doctors determined he needed psychiatric treatment, but rather than simply being a patient, Kemper quickly became an active participant in his own rehabilitation. Atascadero had a unique system where inmates were sometimes allowed to help with administrative tasks. Because of Kemper's intelligence and good behavior, he was assigned to work in the psychiatric ward. He now had access to patients' files, psychological assessments, and doctor's notes. This was a turning point. Kemper wasn't just being rehabilitated, he was studying rehabilitation from the inside. He learned how to manipulate psychological evaluations. He studied the responses of other patients and learned what psychiatrists wanted to hear. He memorized terms, behaviors, and diagnostic criteria to present himself as recovered. How to appear non-threatening. He carefully adjusted his behavior to seem polite, cooperative, and well-adjusted. He avoided showing any violent or predatory tendencies, masking his true nature. How to understand criminal minds. By reading case studies, he learned how other killers had been caught. He gained insight into how law enforcement and psychologists profiled violent offenders. Essentially, Kemper used his time in Atascadero to perfect the art of deception. He learned how to talk his way out of trouble, appear sane, and manipulate the system to his advantage. During his time in the hospital, Kemper was known for his politeness and intelligence, making him a favorite among staff. He was well-liked, well-spoken, and respected by doctors, who saw him as a model patient. But behind the scenes, something darker was brewing. Kemper befriended rapists and murderers, listening to their crimes in detail. He was particularly interested in how they selected victims and avoided capture. These conversations fueled his growing fantasies of control, dominance, and murder. He wasn't just learning about psychology, he was building a playbook for future killings. By 1969, Kemper had spent 5 years in Atascadero. By this point, he had mastered the system. He knew exactly what to say, how to act, and how to appear rehabilitated. Doctors began reevaluating his case. Based on his remarkable improvement, they believed he had outgrown his violent tendencies. Final evaluation report were paranoid schizophrenia diagnosis overturned. Doctors now believed it was a misdiagnosis. Described as fully rehabilitated, he no longer showed signs of aggression, recommended for release back into society. Despite warnings from some staff members who felt uneasy about his sudden recovery, the board approved his release. At just 21 years old, Edmund Kemper walked out of Atascadero a free man. Perhaps the biggest failure of the system was where they sent him next. Instead of placing him in a controlled environment or giving him a fresh start, the authorities released him straight back to his mother, Edmund Kemper. This was the very woman who had abused, belittled, and psychologically tormented him his entire life. Why was this a mistake? His mother was the root of his trauma. Returning to her reignited his deep-seated rage. He still harbored fantasies of killing. While he had convinced doctors he was cured, inside the urge had only grown stronger. He had spent years studying how to avoid detection. His time in Atascadero had made him more dangerous, not less. Just 3 years later, Edmund Kemper would begin his real reign of terror, using everything he had learned in rehabilitation to become the co-ed butcher. Between 1972 and 1973, 6 young women went missing. They all had one thing in common. They accepted a ride from Edmund Kemper. He didn't just kill them. He played with their bodies, desecrated them. He kept souvenirs, heads, hands, grotesque trophies of his work. It started on May 7, 1972. Marianne Pesce and Anita Lucchesa, 2 18-year-old students at Fresno State, were trying to hitch a ride to Stanford University. They never made it. At first, he was the perfect gentleman, friendly, soft-spoken, non-threatening. At 6 feet 9 inches and over 280 pounds, he was intimidating, but he masked it well. The girls got in, and Kemper drove, but he wasn't taking them to Stanford. At some point, Marianne noticed they were heading in the wrong direction. When she questioned him, Kemper's tone changed. The warmth was gone. The mask slipped. He pulled out a knife, ordered them to sit still, but fear makes people reckless. Marianne fought, and that sealed her fate. Kemper lunged. He wrapped his massive hands around her throat, squeezing, crushing, until her struggles slowed and stopped. Anita was next. He did the same to her, watching the life drain from her eyes. But killing them wasn't enough. The real horror started after they were dead. He stuffed their lifeless bodies into the trunk of his car and drove home, past police officers, past unsuspecting neighbors. No one had any idea that the young man they saw every day was transporting 2 corpses in his vehicle. And once he got home, Kemper took his time. He carried their bodies inside, undressed them, positioned them however he liked, and then he took out his knife. He severed their heads carefully, methodically. He took photographs, his own 6 souvenirs. And then for hours he violated their corpses. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was calculated, cold, and ritualistic, the first of many. He was careful. He learned from his mistakes, and for the next year, he perfected his hunting technique. His next victim was 15-year-old Aiko Ku, a promising dancer, a girl full of life, until she got into the wrong car. She begged for her life. She even tried to reason with him, but there was no reasoning with Kemper. He strangled her. He took her home. He did what he always did, violated the corpse, removed the head, disposed of the body, and then he did it again and again and again. He killed Cindy Shaw, Rosalind Thorpe, Alice Liu, all college students, all young women who never saw it coming. The police were baffled, no pattern, no witnesses. But Kemper didn't just blend in. He was part of their inner circle. He drank with the very men hunting him. He listened to their theories. He gave them false leads. They never suspected the harmless giant in their midst. The final murders, a mother's nightmare. But his real target had always been one person, Clarnell, his mother. On April 20th, 1973, he finally snapped. He waited until she was asleep. Then he entered her bedroom and stood over her. With one swift motion, he caved in her skull with a claw hammer. But that wasn't enough. He decapitated her, violated her corpse, stuffed her larynx down the garbage disposal. When it clogged, he laughed and murmured, "She always did talk too much." Then he called his mother's best friend over, Sally Hallett. She had no idea she was walking into a slaughterhouse. The moment she stepped inside, Kemper strangled her too, treating her like just another plaything. And then he turned himself in. After killing 8 women, his mother and her friend Edmund Kemper picked up the phone and confessed. And when asked why, he simply said, "I was tired of killing." It had been 3 days since Edmund Kemper slaughtered his mother and her friend. 3 days of sitting in his house, alone, surrounded by the aftermath of his most personal kill. And then he made the call. A police officer answers. His eyes widen. "Wait, who is this?" Ed Kemper." The name sent a jolt through the dispatcher. They knew Ed. He was the friendly giant who drank with the local cops, who shared beers and stories with them. But now his voice was different, flat, unemotional, and what he was saying didn't make sense. The officer scribbled something down, glancing around nervously. "Ed, you're telling me you killed someone?" "Not someone, my mother and her friend and the co-eds." At first, they didn't believe him. It had to be a joke, a misunderstanding. But then Kemper gave details only the killer would know. Locations, methods, the way he mutilated the bodies. And suddenly, it wasn't a joke anymore. When the police arrived, they found Edmund Kemper sitting calmly on a bench outside a phone booth. He didn't run. He didn't resist. He just raised his hands and said, "I'm the one you're looking for." The officers were in disbelief. This was the same man who had beers with them at the jury room bar, the guy who had helped them with the case. Now he was confessing. But the truth hit them as soon as they arrived at Kemper's home. The moment they stepped inside, they knew. The blood, the bodies, the horror. This wasn't a false confession. It was real. Most killers deny. They twist the truth. They fight to save themselves. Not Kemper. From the moment he sat down, he confessed everything. He wanted them to know. "Why did you do it, Ed?" the detective asked. "I had to do it," he said. "It was building inside me. And I knew if I killed my mother, I'd be free." He described each murder in chilling detail, the way he'd lure young women into his car, the precise moment he decided to kill, the sensation of strangling them, watching the life drain from their eyes. But the worst part? His voice never wavered. No regret, no remorse, just facts. "And after they were dead?" the detective asked. Ed replied, "I took them home, had my fun, took pictures, kept souvenirs." Silence. The detectives exchanged horrified glances. He explained everything, how he severed their heads, how he kept them as trophies, how he buried them in his backyard, staring up at his mother's window. And then he told them about her. The real reason for everything. The years of psychological abuse. The hatred that festered inside him. He told them that killing her was the only thing that truly set him free. A packed courtroom. Flashbulbs pop. Reporters scribble notes as Edmund Kemper takes the stand. His trial was a media circus. Reporters swarmed the courtroom, hungry for every disturbing detail. And once again, Kemper didn't hold back. Kemper leans into the microphone, staring blankly ahead, and says, "I'm guilty. I know I deserve to die. If there was a death penalty, I'd want it." But California had temporarily banned the death penalty. Instead, the jury sentenced him to 8 consecutive life sentences, and just like that, Edmund Kemper was locked away forever. Most serial killers struggle in prison. They get attacked, they get isolated. Not Kemper. He became a model inmate. He spent his days reading, writing, and perhaps most disturbingly, recording audiobooks for blind children. Yes, the man who strangled young women to death spent decades narrating bedtime stories for children, a prison guard once said. He's polite, well-spoken, creepy as hell, but if you met him without knowing who he was, you'd probably like him. As of today, Edmund Kemper is still alive, still serving his sentence, still in that cold gray prison cell. But his story, it never really ended, because his voice, his legacy, and the horrors he committed, they still echo, and they always will. But his story, it never really ended, because his voice, his legacy, and the horrors he committed, they still echo, and they always will. If you found this case as disturbing as we did, there's so much more waiting for you on the Dark Side Diaries. We dive deep into the minds of the world's most twisted killers, unsolved mysteries, and the darkest crimes in history. No detail left out. So if you haven't already, hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and turn on notifications, because you don't want to miss what's coming next. And trust me, the next case, it's even more chilling. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Edmund Kemper's time in rehab made him worse? Or was he always destined to kill again? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let's talk about it. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and remember, some nightmares are real.